Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Miller Children's and Women's Hospital Long Beach and Long Beach Medical Center. We are hosting our 4th annual Mental Health Summit, and we are pleased to have all of you, our participants that are here. But a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. The sessions will be videotaped, and the link to that video will be sent to all registrants for today's event. And meanwhile, if you have a question, please use the index cards you received at registration and fill out. There's a box to my left that says questions. We'll be collecting them, so please fill them out by 10:30 if you have any additional questions. And then we already received some questions from you from registrants online. And we will be accepting cards at 10:30. And then now on to our program. So I would like to recognize some elected official staff who have attended today. I'd like to recognize Casey Hervey with U.S. Congresswoman Barragan's office. Casey, do you want to wave your hand? Thank you. We also have Suvana with Senator Majority Leader Lena Gonzalez, Maya Douglas with Assembly Member Mike Gibson, Clayton Hurd, and Lisbeth Chamel with Assembly Member Josh Lowenthal, as well as Ida Pickett with Council Member Dr. Joni Ricks Audi, and Brian Martinez with Council Member Al Austin. So thank you for all of our attendees and elected officials who are represented here today. So at Miller Children's and Women's Hospital, we care for infants to our young adults at every step of their journey in hopes that we can return them to the wellness or help them better manage their chronic condition. But what society tends to forget is we remain so focused on the physical wellness that we put the impact on the patient's mental health on the back burner. So Miller Children's and Women's, along with the other 8 freestanding children's hospitals in California, knows that mental health is just as important as physical health in a child or an adolescent's well-being. In fact, studies from the NIH, CDC, and NAMI all show that when, for example, a child is treated for depression, along with their chronic conditions, they have a better chance and a quicker chance of a positive recovery. That is why we have clinical psychologists on site, including our Dr. Powell, Dr. Zavalza, and Dr. Morse, to help out young patients navigate not only the physical ailment, but their emotional state of acceptance and hope and survival. We also have an after-school integration or offer a school integration program for our young children with cancer to get them acclimated back to the normalcies of childhood, with the basic tasks of going to school and seeing old playground friends again. In addition, patients often need mental health resources outside of our walls. And many of the clinical team partners with the clinical teams here at Miller's will partner with behavioral health experts, clinicians, providers, organizations throughout Long Beach and the region to support our children. Many of these are here today and presenting today, so thank you. Mental health advocacy in our youth is of utmost importance. And I would like to thank our panelists and the organizations such as the City of Long Beach, the Guidance Center, the LGBTQ Center of Long Beach, Mental Health America LA, and the Make Noise Today for their collaboration and dedication. Lastly, thank you to all of our panelists for sharing their wisdom to everyone who came here today and to help bring awareness on and bring openness to understand and reduce the stigma of mental health. Next, I want to introduce the new director for the Long Beach Department of Health and Human Services. Yes, hear it out. For our health department, Ms. Allison King. Ms. King brings to the position over 5 years of experience as public health administrator and over 20 years of human services experience. Ms. King has served as an acting director for the health department since October of 2023. We are fortunate to have our own public health department right here in the city of Long Beach, and it allows us to leverage all of our healthcare assets and reach out to facilities and children's health needs. Ms. King, welcome and thank you.
Before I get started, I'd like to acknowledge our 3rd District Councilwoman, Christina Duggan, who just came into the room a little while ago. Raise your hand. Thank you for being here. Good morning to all of you. We recognize Mental Health Awareness Month, and I want to thank you for your passion and your dedication to caring for our children experiencing various behavioral health conditions. As many know, the Long Beach Health Department provides many mental health resources throughout the city for families to access, but we can't do this without your partnership. On May 4th, Governor Newsom recognized Children's Mental Health Awareness Day. And in his proclamation, he stated, "Children and youth across the country are facing a mental health crisis that disproportionately impacts young people of color, LGBTQ+ youth, and those in under-resourced communities. In California, we take the mental health and well-being of our children seriously, and we are taking action to provide struggling kids the support they need to thrive in body and in mind. Today, we're here to bring awareness around children's mental health, as well as creating a safe place to help families and clinicians across behavioral health support services that exist in and around this community. It's imperative that we continue to meet in forums like this one today to educate and share tools to help our children navigate their mental health journey. With that said, I am pleased to introduce our guest speaker, Karen Balumbu Bennett. Karen is a licensed clinical social worker with experience providing therapy within community mental health settings, victim of crime agencies and psychiatric emergency outreach teams. She works with the Los Angeles Unified School District as a school-based therapist. Karen is an advocate of community care and strongly believes in the benefits of collective healing. With her motto, "Balance over everything," which is a reminder that when aspects of life are in the correct proportion, overall wellness is more achievable. Let me welcome Karen Balumbu Bennett to the podium.
Thank you for that introduction, Allison, and thank you, Memorial Care, for having me here today. Thank you, everyone that took out time from your very busy schedules to be with us today to take part in this extremely important conversation. So the growing concern surrounding youth mental health absolutely affects each and every one of us in this room, whether directly or indirectly. Recent studies have shown a considerable increase in mental health challenges amongst our youth, where factors such as academic pressures, social media, family discord, economic stressors are just some of the issues contributing to the increase of youth mental health challenges. We're even at the point where terms that were once more used in the clinical and medical setting, like toxic stress and adverse childhood experiences, are being heard all over, right? You can walk into a coffee shop, in your home, and even me walking down the hallways of schools, I hear students saying things like, "Well, my social anxiety," or "my therapist said," right? So they're slowly chipping away at that stigma. And then COVID came, and we saw that this magnifying glass that was focused on adolescent trauma and mental health began to really hone in on the mental wellness of Black youth, as we saw a significant increase in mental health challenges within that group. With media spotlighting racial injustice after racial injustice, racial violence, discrimination, people were forced to really consider how collective racial trauma impacts the mental health of Black youth. And people were starting to say, well, what do we do about it? Because the problem just seems so large. So I want to share a little story with you about a former youth that I work with, and we're going to call her Evie. So Evie was 16 and 17, and she was an 11th grader at a local high school. She was brought to my attention by a school administrator because of her poor attendance, failing grades, quote-unquote defiant behavior, and also she was caught with a vape pen. Teachers were somewhat irritated and annoyed with Evie because she would interrupt them, distract other students, walk out of class without asking. She always had to use the restroom. You know, that student who right after lunch has to use the restroom. So just really frustrated and didn't know what to do. They always said that she would talk back and she would question their authority. So I was actually somewhat already familiar with Evie because I actually had the joy of working the tardy sweep, the morning tardy sweep. And I actually really did enjoy it. So some people hated it, but it was actually my opportunity to welcome students and not start off with a reprimand, right? Just like, hey, I'm so glad you made it here. Yes, we're 30 minutes late, but we have the whole rest of the day. You got this. I'm glad to see you. Like, look at your outfit. You look so nice. You all coordinated. But how about we try to do this the night before so that when you come to school, or when you wake up the next morning, it's easier for you to get here on time. And of course, lovely Evie was a frequent flyer with that tardy sweep. But it also just allowed me to get to know her, to greet her, and to greet her with a smile when she did show up to school. I was also familiar with Evie's father, who had a physical and cognitive disability and was a single dad. He visited the school office often because he would receive frustrating phone calls about Evie's attendance. So when I finally sat down with Evie, she didn't really know my role, but she said that I was the nice lady that was too happy in the mornings. And she didn't have a problem actually sitting down with me and opening up to me. I learned that she yearned for a relationship with her mom, who was in and out of jail, which means she was in and out of Evie's life. Mom had a long history of substance abuse and dependency, which caused a lot of conflict with her ability to really connect with Evie. I also learned that Evie was really worried about the possibility of her dad's physical or mental health declining. And she had like this overwhelming fear of him being unable to care for herself or her brother. Evie shared that she either missed school or arrived late because she needed to spend time on her hair and clothes in the morning. She had to look good, but it was because she didn't want her clothes to look quote unquote cheap, and she didn't want people to make fun of her. She also shared that she had this fear of not escaping poverty and ending up like her mom. In her own 16-year-old way, she basically was just expressing feeling trapped, helpless, and hopeless. From that day forward, Evie would check in with me a couple of times a week. Our meeting topics were often random. It wasn't really therapeutic in setting. She would come in just really quickly because she wanted to show me the latest TikTok dance, and I would get up and learn the dance because I want to know the TikTok dances as well. She would share with me the latest celebrity gossip and the gossip in the school, who's dating who got mad at this person because they left a heart eye emoji under this person's picture, all the fun stuff. I also learned about her love for hair and makeup, as she would criticize the beauty industry for constantly messing up dark-skinned Black women's makeup. And she really was interested in trying to get into that field. I was able to learn that she had an aunt on her father's side who she really looked up to and felt close to. Evie also used our informal check-ins to share her thoughts about the racial injustices occurring at the time. And she disclosed that she would stay up late, going down the rabbit hole, watching videos about innocent Black and brown people being killed. So like this constant vicarious trauma that she was experiencing. Sometimes it would seem that Evie just wanted me to assure that she was safe. Evie started to attend school more regularly and always made it a point to check in with me if it was even just for 2 minutes, and I would say, all right, Evie, time to go to class. I'm so glad you're here, but time to go to class. It didn't take too long for me to realize that the teacher complaints about Evie being defiant, withdrawn, etc., were more of a manifestation of her symptoms related to her childhood trauma, depression, and anxiety, rather than her just being this rebellious teen. So with her permission, I was able to share some of what she disclosed with me to her teachers. I shared with the dean and with the academic counselor. I was able to even loop in our parent center, rep, and a community mental health agency to get support for not just Evie, but for her father as well. I took a trauma-informed approach by collaborating with Evie to make sure that she agreed with the plan and the resources provided. So Evie eventually had to transfer to a nearby continuation school because she was really deficient with her credits. But with all the resources in place, she showed an increase in motivation and improved her attendance, her grades, and her mental health. She went on to obtain her diploma and began a trade program. So Evie's story is a perfect example of how community care goes a long way. Supporting Evie and her family was a multidisciplinary team approach. It involves staff really checking their own biases as well in order to further explore how mental health symptoms show up, sometimes differently, in Black youth. But honestly, it really just started with a little act of kindness, with removing the urge to reprimand and say, well, why are you late? Why don't you ever come to school, get to class? And really working on slowly building rapport, establishing trust, listening, and holding space. Youth, especially Black youth, want to make sure that adults are really seeing them, really listening to them, and respecting them. All right, so I pose this question to all of us in attendance. Are you building a positive relationship with the youth in your life? So let's just take a second and think about it, right? We talked about how the problem is just so big and we don't even know where to start sometimes. So is there someone in your life who can call you with good news, who can call you if they're in trouble? Is there a youth that maybe you check on just randomly, or you text to congratulate them because you heard they did well? If you have that youth in mind, that's great. You have homework. So your homework is just to send a simple check-in text today. Just continue to build that rapport, check in with them. And if you can't think of that youth, that's okay. You still have homework, right? You still have homework. You can also begin to build that relationship with the youth. And you could do it by this summer. Summer's a great time to try to connect with youth while they're not in school, they may not be involved in sports, and they have a lot of time on their hands. So that's a SMART goal. For my clinicians in the room, that was a SMART goal: specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound, right? So I will close with this. One of my favorite quotes, it's very simple, and it's from the late poet and activist, Audre Lorde, who said, "Without community, there is no liberation." So we are the community, and we can help liberate our youth. Thank you.
Let's give a warm welcome again to Karen and to Allison for joining us. Thank you so much. So we're going to move forward and welcome our MC for today, Dr. Iona Powell with our Stramsky Center here at Miller Children's and Women's Hospital. I also want to again recognize Councilwoman Duggan for coming today. Thank you so much for your leadership in mental health too as well, so thank you.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. And thank you again for the opening remarks and that wonderful story regarding community and connection, which I hope we can all do a little bit better after today, even than we were doing yesterday. So with that in mind, again, I am a clinical psychologist at Stramsky Children's Developmental Center here at Miller Children's. I do mostly psychological evaluations, and we do refer out in the community, so we depend on partners like you. I do want to just mention really quickly, we have a great panel today who will speak about various concerns and important issues in terms of mental health in our community and outside of our communities. But I do want to recognize their vulnerability and their ability to provide us with information and ask you that you do not consider it clinical, therapeutic advice or any kind of treatment recommendations. This is just to inform us of how we can move forward and where to connect after today. So if you keep that in mind, I would appreciate it. And as Kristen mentioned, this is videotaped and it will be available for anyone who wants to loop backwards and see it again. As Kristen mentioned, there are question boxes. If you can please put them in there. I know we're running a little bit behind, but if you can put your questions in the boxes, it would be appreciated. And then at the end of the program, when we're done, the panelists will be available for a couple extra minutes if anyone has any burning questions that we didn't get to, if you want to ask them individually, okay? Without further ado, I will introduce our panel speakers in the order they will be presenting. First, we will have Dr. Christina Zavalza, who is representing the Guidance Center and Miller Children's Hospital. She's got a dual role, and she is a clinical psychologist as well. Next, we have Katrina Flores, Vice President, Mental Health America of Los Angeles in the House. And then after her, we'll have Peter Beck, Manager, Youth and Family Services, representing the LGBTQ Center here in Long Beach. And concluding will be Michael Vitug, Executive Director at Intertrend Communications and Make Noise Today. So I will ask Dr. Zavalsa to please come up and begin.
Okay, hello. Thank you. I'm honored to be speaking here today, and I wanted to thank other amazing teams that also helped me to support the mental health of our children and youth in the hospital inpatient setting, including our social work team, spiritual care, child life, and various other amazing resources that we have. So thank you to all of you. Given that my current focus is on pediatric psychology, I thought it would be fitting to discuss the relationship between mental health and physical health, such an important discussion in today's world. But what is the mind-body connection? And nowadays we hear mind-body connection sort of thrown everywhere. The mind-body connection refers to the communication and interaction between our minds and our bodies. Or another way of putting it, the connection between our thoughts, our attitudes and beliefs, and our physical functioning. Historically, the mind and the body have been talked about as two separate entities. However, the reason it's so important to have multidisciplinary healthcare approaches or teams where we have both physical health providers and mental health providers working together is because more and more research has found that physical health and mental health are closely in connection and impact one another. For some of us, it might be challenging to identify how our own minds and bodies impact one another, even though it's happening at every single moment. Take a moment for yourself and see if you can identify an example of when your own mind and body have influenced one another. The truth is that we all have experienced the mind-body connection. Sorry, here we go. For some of us, when we're nervous, we might get sweaty hands or sweaty palms. When we're stressed, we might get a headache. When we're worried, we might feel nauseous or get a stomach ache. And when we're sad, some of us might feel tired or physically fatigued. These are examples of how our mental states impact our physical state. Often when we talk about the mind-body connection, we talk about how our minds impact our bodies. However, emerging brain research has shown that there's a much more complex interplay between the mind and the body, one that we can't get into specifics in detail today, but I wanted to mention and can be explored on your own if you're interested in some light reading. But I will talk about stress. Chronic stress can have negative effects on your body. When you stress out, your body releases adrenaline and cortisol, which is great if you have a tiger chasing you and you need to run to get away. However, more times than not, we are not in these types of life and death situations. More so, we're having adrenaline and cortisol dumps for day-to-day stressors, which leads to mental health and physical health symptoms. For our kids and adolescents, stress can come from various sources, and sometimes that list can seem endless. The sources of stress can be reintegrating after pandemic-related stressors, political and social unrest and cultural stressors, violence in their community, family challenges or family discord, parental separation and divorce. Change, and even happy change, can be experienced as stressful, including a new sibling in the family or changing homes. Romantic relationships, peer pressure, children managing the perceptions of others on them, academic stress, and of course, our chronic or acute illnesses. Stress in young people doesn't always look like stress in adults. In my current role as a pediatric psychologist, I often hear parents say, "No, my child is not stressed." As adults, we assume that children and adolescents would verbalize if they're feeling distressed. But who are we kidding? Even as adults, we hardly verbalize when we're stressed. I've included potential social and emotional indicators of stress, as well as physical symptoms of stress that you might notice in your child or adolescent. We can see irritability and anger, maybe a change in behavior, something that they don't normally do but are suddenly doing. Behavioral regression, things that they used to be able to do on their own or like to do on their own, suddenly they need help or want you to do it for them. Trouble sleeping, neglecting responsibilities, avoiding particular settings or avoiding people, loss of motivation, crying or withdrawing. We also can see physical symptoms of stress, including changes in their eating habits or weight changes, or your child is getting sick more often, or they're complaining of body aches, stomach aches, headaches, tiredness. They might shake or have limb weakness or shortness of breath. I hope you like my clip art. I heard that there's way cooler ways of doing this today that I'm not aware of. In order to highlight the mind-body connection, I want to give an example of what this interaction of physical and mental health symptoms look like. Sometimes, in the hospital, I'll see children and adolescents admitted inpatient due to significant abdominal pain. Now, intense abdominal pain is worrisome. We want to first assess if there's any gastrointestinal problems happening. However, sometimes, after a full GI workup, everything comes back normal. In fact, sometimes the child is experiencing what is called slow gastric emptying, which really just means that their intestines are processing, I'm trying to move my notes down, are processing food more slowly. And so what we often try to do is to treat that medically. But really, why did their intestines start processing food slowly in the first place? A lot of times it's because of psychological and mental stressors. And so maybe the answer isn't to just intervene medically or clean this kiddo out or give them some kind of laxative that will help them to pass the food, but to address the problem, the mental health part of their functioning. So given that we now know about the mind-body connection, what do we do? I can't find my arrow. Give me 1 second, everyone. Here we go. Okay, what do? We want to first make sure to initiate conversations with your child. Be curious about social, emotional, behavioral, and physical changes that are occurring for them. Some of these might be typical or related to puberty, but we don't want to assume this. We want to make sure that they get mental health checkups and physical health checkups. Right? Oftentimes, we're very comfortable taking our child or our youth to get their annual physical exam with their primary care provider, but the idea of getting a mental health assessment can feel foreign to us. There are also interventions that we can do to support youth ongoing. Remember that not only do our minds impact our bodies, but it also works the other way around. By addressing our physical health, we can improve our mental health. So some of these ways might be mental health interventions, just providing emotional support. Give your child extra time, attention, and love. Ask how they might need to be listened to or how they would like us to respond to them. Encourage rest. Meditation practices. In today's world, our minds are going very fast. Help your child to slow their mind down, to be present. Therapy can support with changing thoughts and beliefs about things that might be causing distress that maybe don't need to be. It can also help with building coping skills. Encourage your child to engage back into their talents and their skills. And of course, we want to integrate any spiritual or religious practices, any cultural practices that might support them in feeling part of a community. In terms of physical health, promoting consistent eating schedules. We want to encourage fun exercise, not exercise that they're trying to stay away from. Deep breathing, yoga. Promoting better sleep hygiene for our kids, healthier diets, and stretching. The point I'd like for you to take away today is that our minds and our bodies not only communicate, but affect one another. As a community, we need to get more comfortable with checking in and supporting our youth, both in their mental and physical health regularly. Thank you. Okay, I'd like to welcome our next speaker, Katrina Flores.
Good morning. I'd like to thank Miller Children and Women's Hospital for inviting our agency to participate in this great event. I'd also like to acknowledge the amazing work of all the panelists that I get to be a part of, and wanted to say thank you for the work that you all do. With that being said, my title was a little long, so it didn't fit in your program. I want to kind of specify that. My name is Katrina Flores. I am the Vice President of Internal Staff Development and Training. What does that mean? No clue. No idea. It's a fairly new position. I started it in February. But prior to this, I spent about 11 years overseeing our Transition Age Youth Services program. And so Transition Age Youth is kind of where I'm focusing today in talking about adventure therapy and how it helps us with coping skills and a ton of other great things. So our agency, I was actually introduced to MHLA. Ooh, I'm gonna date myself. I first met MHLA about 22 years ago. I had graduated undergrad, and I lived in Monterey County, and we received funding to do Housing First model, and it was called AB 2034 back then. I don't know if any of y'all are familiar. We were the last county to get funded, and MHLA had their headquarters, and it was called The Village, and they were funded to train all of us, and we did a week-long immersion. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. When we got here, they put us to work. We went out in the field, we met members, we call our clients members or students. We went out into the field, we met members, we did hands-on work. I got to see something that just blew my mind, and we treated clients not as clients, we treated them as human beings. We were doing more of a holistic approach back then when I first started working with them, before holistic approach was a theme. It was, the norm. And I drank the Kool-Aid. I fell in love with MHLA and their philosophy around the recovery model, around harm reduction, meeting the individuals where they are at. And that has actually been the foundation of a significant part of my career. After that training, I went home and I was like, ooh, one day I'm gonna work for MHLA. I was in my 20s. I didn't know any better. But funny thing is, I did come back. I came back home in 2013, and I started as the Assistant Director for Transition Age Youth. And one of the things that I loved is that we include everybody in how we do the work that we do. So here you see our mission, you see our values. The recovery model is really based on 4 pillars: empowerment, hope, meaningful responsibility, and a meaningful role. And you can see that in our values that are there. It's evolved, of course, over the years, but it continues to be our pillar and of the work that we do, and mine in terms of my career. So in terms of Transition Age Youth, I oversaw Tay Academy, and when I first started, we had 8 staff and 1 program, and we provided full service partnership, which is essentially wraparound outpatient services. It's the last stop that an individual will go to before they may end up in something more long-term, like a locked facility, in jail, or maybe something worse, and pass away. And so we receive our funding from DMH, and we would receive our referrals from foster care, individuals aging out of children's services, hospitals, locked facilities. And so we worked with individuals that are pretty high risk and struggled with severe mental illness. We eventually grew our project, and I believe we provide about 6 different types of programs. We provide a lower level of care, outpatient services, we have housing services, we do employment, and our newest project is United Mental Health Promoter Project, and that's our girls over there. Shout out to them. So if you want to visit the table, and this is really doing more of a meso community level type work. So when I decided I was going to go to school, I decided, you know what, I'm going to get my master's. I'm born and raised in California. I went to Michigan. Whoa, did I have a culture shock. I thought I was ready to go. I packed up my truck. I'm like, yes, I'm there. I'm good. I have all my winter gear. No, that was like spring gear. And I believe my first year there, the folks that I lived with, they're like, this is the worst winter we've had in 10 years. And I was like, wow, that is great. However, I fell in love with it. I fell in love with having 4 seasons. I developed allergies, and I didn't know what that was. But it was great. I wouldn't take back my time, because this was my first introduction into adventure therapy. And I was like, what the heck is that? adventure therapy. But adventure therapy has been around since the 60s. So you may have heard of like Outward Bound programs. You may have seen movies about where they send kids that are in juvenile justice programs out and take them to go hiking, camping, and, you know, go through various different tasks and milestones that they have to complete. So when I learned about adventure therapy, it was out in Michigan, and I fell in love with it because I really love outdoors, I love camping, and I also enjoyed serving and helping people, and I didn't know I could put the two together. So when I came back to MHLA, when I came home, transition age youth was a perfect target population to start doing this work with. And I pitched the idea, and that's one of the things that we really foster at MHLA is if you have an idea, let's do it, let's run with it, because that also transcends and impacts the members that we serve. And so if we get inspired and we want to try stuff, they then get inspired and they start to try stuff. You know, they kind of seek out additional opportunities that maybe they're afraid to do before. So there are 3 different kind of categories. There's wilderness, there's on-site camping, and then there's adventure-based. And we focus solely on adventure-based therapy. The reason we did that is because you have to connect it and tie it to an outpatient program. Now, mind you, many of our students had never been outside of the city. They'd never been outside of foster care, never been outside of the city that they lived in. So they had no idea we were a few blocks away from the beach. They had no idea we were literally 30, 40 minutes away to these beautiful mountains that we could go hiking in. And so we started small. We did events like barbecues in the park, especially El Dorado Park, which isn't too far from here. We would do things there. There's a nature walk you can do. We started out with baby steps. And we had our students come together, connect. We brought food, because breaking bread with folks is really a great way for people to, you know, break down barriers, to develop trust, to build their social support. And so we did that, and then we started taking them out. We started small with nature hikes. We also went to a couple tide pools, some fun things, before we got into the really deep, deeper things like hiking and depending on each other and communicating, and how do you work through this climb? How do you go through this tree? How do you do this? How do you do that? A couple different things we did. These are actual pictures of some of our events. We started off with a big event called glamping, which really isn't, we stayed in cabins. We had our food catered. So the staff loved it, but that was the initial way. It was out in Big Bear. We would drive out there and we would hang out for a weekend. We would do talent show and all different kinds of things. So that went over really well. We then got adventurous. We actually partnered with the Long Beach Yacht Club, and we started to do sailing. We also then started to do real live camping, where we went out to a KOA and we camped. We set up fires. It really helped the students, one, to see outside of the city itself, but it had so many benefits that we didn't recognize. It helped them to decrease social isolation. It helped with their depression. It helped lower their stress. It helped to develop a social support. It also helped them to feel grounded. We did some of the things where let's take off our shoes and walk around, and they loved that. And there's several other benefits that it had, but I wanna share a story with you. This is a story of hope, and this is I missed my truck. That truck went camping with us everywhere. But this young man, we're gonna call him JJ, he is definitely a story of hope. When I first met him, I was actually out on a call. I had to do an assessment to determine if this young man needed to go on a 72-hour hold. When I met him, he hadn't showered in days. He was in clothes that were ragged. He was staying on the railroad tracks, and he had built himself this little camp. And that's where he had been living. We got connected with him, and he was wearing a mop on his head, and he believed that he was Jesus. And so after going out there, doing the assessment, we were able to get him into the hospital, and over about a month or two, we helped him to stabilize. We reconnected him with his mom. But the part that always brings me to tears is he was one of the first that we took camping. And when we went camping, he didn't know how to swim, and we taught him how to swim. There was a pool that was there. We taught him how to swim, and I remember him yelling at me saying, "Katrina, call my mom, call my mom." So we picked up the cell phone, called mom, and we also videoed it. And we sent it to her, and mom was in tears thanking us that we, provided that opportunity for this young man. This young man has since graduated. He is living life and doing wonderful, but he is one of the reasons why we will continue to do adventure therapy. So that is my time. I have the little card that's gone up. Thank you very much. I want to introduce. I want to introduce our next speaker, Peter Bach from the LGBT Center.
Hi, everybody. My name is Peter Beck. I use he, they pronouns. I'm the program manager of Youth and Family Services at the LGBTQ Center Long Beach. If you have not seen us, we are right on 4th and Cherry on Retro Row. If you are looking for us, you will see a giant rainbow flag above all the other businesses. So that is us. I am lucky enough to be able to head a program at the LGBTQ Center Long Beach where we specifically provide multiple drop-in spaces for youth of all ages, all the way from 4 years old to 29. So it is a huge range. But I'm really grateful to be able to do that work. I've been able to work with the center with youth for about 7 years now. And it's just been a very enriching place to be able to see the positive impact we can make on youth in real time. So today I am here to talk about gender norms and how gender norms can create anxiety in youth and how we can mitigate that ourselves using specific practices. So first off, I had to do a plug because, once again, I'm from the LGBT Center Long Beach. I have the Youth Services Program. We do many different services. The majority of them are all free. And open to anyone, regardless of orientation, gender identity, etc. If you are interested in learning about any of those, please check out our resource table in the far back corner. My colleague Laura is over there as well. So if you have any questions about that, please feel free to go over there. Okay, so before we get into gender norms, I want us to kind of go over some baseline definitions here. We're going to talk about first, what are sex, gender, and expression? For some of you, you may think, okay, these are all separate things. I know exactly what these are. And for many of you, you might say, I thought this was all the same thing, right? But really, when we think about sex, gender, and expression, everyone does have sex, gender, and expression. And really, all of these things can be the same, different, aligned, differing, right? So first off, we have sex. Sex is assigned at birth. It is based on our anatomy. All bodies are different, they change and grow in different ways, but generally speaking, when you are born, you are hoisted up by a medical professional. They look at your anatomy and they say, this is a boy, or this is a girl, or I can say that this is neither a boy or a girl based on their characteristics, right? So it's physical, it's what's on the outside. Gender is our internal sense of being male, female, or another identity. Gender is something that is present within all of us, right? It's our internal truth. And it might not be something you think about, right? If you're someone who maybe has a sex and a gender to align, maybe this isn't really a thought that's ever come across your mind. But for folks whose sex and gender maybe don't align, this is something that they have to think about constantly, every day. And then finally, we have expression. Expression is how one demonstrates their identity through behaviors, interactions, and dress. So for example, hairstyles, clothing, gestures, your voice, all these things, right? These are how we express our identity. One thing to remember, though, is that expression does not indicate gender or sex, right? So for example, if you see someone who has some very flashy eyeshadow, and it's sparkling in the light, if you see eyeshadow, society tends to tell us, oh, girl, right? That's feminine, we should assume that's a girl. But we have to remember that, once again, makeup, clothing, all these things are just parts of ways that we express ourselves, and they don't equate to someone's gender or identity. We can also think of the fact that societal expectations about expression and what's feminine and masculine changes all the time, right? During lockdown, I know a lot of men did grow out their hair, right? The man bun became very popular. But before that, generally speaking, I would say maybe 15, 20 years ago, long hair on men was considered either feminine, or they would say you look like Fabio or you look like Thor. It was not something that was typically associated with manliness, right? But we see that the societal expectations of expression change so quickly, right? And one's ability to express themselves comfortably and safely is a privilege. So if your expression is what society expects, you probably won't deal with much pushback, but if it's something that they do not expect or don't encourage, then you can really deal with a lot of discrimination and attention. So how do we understand our gender? Gender identity is developed between the ages of 3 to 5 years old. Youth learn gender norms from birth and by age 10 are reinforcing them in other youth. So you might be thinking, how do youth learn gender norms from birth, right? If they can't even talk. We can think of the fact that usually when you're born, your bedroom has a color, right? Your toys have a color, your clothing has a color. These things teach us what gender norms are, what's expected of us, and what we should be teaching other people around us. So what are gender norms? Gender norms are expectations on how we're expected to act, speak, dress, groom, and conduct ourselves based upon our assigned sex at birth and our perceived gender identity. Every society, ethnic group, and culture has gender role expectations, but they can vary from group to group and can change in the same society over time. And how do these gender norms create anxiety in youth? Perspectives of masculinity and femininity may differ for everyone in this room, everyone in general. These differences can cause inner conflict for youth in many different settings, right? School, households, bathrooms, clothing stores, religious institutions, workplaces, medical settings. Youth who don't conform to gender norms can face discrimination and negative mental health outcomes at a disproportionate rate. And this isn't necessarily youth who come out, right, as trans or gender nonconforming or anything like that. It's really based on perception. I'm sure with many of you, maybe you have worked with youth that have said, I've been teased because of what I've worn to school, right? I've been teased because of the way I act, the interest I have. This is everywhere, right? And this can happen to anyone, regardless of gender identity, expression, or sex assigned at birth. Specifically for trans and gender nonconforming youth, there are very few spaces where these communities can feel safe and affirmed in expressing their identity. Once again, it is a privilege to express yourself freely. And a lot of the time, they only have 1 or 2 spaces where they won't be bullied or discriminated against or isolated for their expression. So some statistics to support the fact that gender norms create anxiety. According to the Trevor Project, the 2023 U.S. National Survey on Mental Health of LGBTQ young people, 70% of LGBTQ youth ages 13 to 17 experience symptoms of anxiety. These are most frequently reported by transgender men, non-binary genderqueer people, and people who are questioning their gender identity. More than half of LGBTQ youth were verbally harassed because people thought they were LGBTQ. 32% were not allowed to dress in a way that fit their gender identity or expression, and 9% were physically attacked because people thought they were LGBTQ. So with this information, how do we cut down on this anxiety, right? How do we create more positive mental health outcomes for youth who maybe are struggling with gender norms? Reflect on your own ideas of how you understand gender norms, right? All of us have been taught how to think of gender and how to conduct ourselves in a certain way based on our upbringing. Think about that, right? We all have our biases, we all have our implicit trainings that we've been given. Do these gender norms that are present in your subconscious affect how you treat others, right? When you interact with youth, think of the kind of ideas that you're reinforcing, right? If someone cries in front of you, let's say a young boy cries in front of you, do you say, let's talk about it? Or do you say, don't cry, be strong, right? That's a gender norm. What gender norms have we been and or are actively reinforcing in others, right? And what messages do those convey to youth? And this doesn't just go for clients. It also goes for our colleagues, our family, people in our personal lives. What gender norms are we reinforcing? Also know local LGBTQ plus resources like the center. Keep LGBTQ affirmative lists for all types of referrals. And also just in general, ensure that the spaces that you are sending your clients to are inclusive, right? And also be an ally to your client and child in all spaces. If you witness a misuse of pronouns, a colleague not using a person's asserted name, a friend reinforcing biases, say something, right? In all spaces. So that is my presentation. Thank you for listening today. Yeah. Once again, my name is Peter Beck. Thank you to Memorial Care for inviting me. And we have resources in the back. I'm going to welcome my fellow panelist and the next presenter, Michael Wittug. Thank you.
Okay, so I'd like to start with some numbers, probably not the best numbers right off the bat, but number one. And with number one, according to Office of Minority Health, Mental Health America, suicide is the number one cause of death amongst Asian Americans 15 to 24 years old. 50%. According to UCLA Health, Asian Americans are 50% less to seek mental health compared to other groups. And also another one, 30%. That's number represents Asian American males grades 9 through 12 who are more likely to consider suicide than their non-Hispanic white counterparts. So, according to this, yes, with the Asian American community, there are mental health challenges. So I'm here, I'm a little different here because I'm coming from a different perspective as opposed to my esteemed colleagues in the panel. I'm not from the medical or mental health field. I'm Michael Wittug. I'm from Intertrend Communications. We are actually an advertising agency right here in downtown Long Beach. About 4 years ago, well, when COVID started and there was a rise in Asian violence and anti-Asian rhetoric, Intertrend had to step up. I mean, we, being one of the community leaders, we needed to support our Asian American community. And we created Make Noise Today, which is a social justice program dedicated to empowering Asian American youth by amplifying their voices and providing platforms for their stories to be heard and shared. Our mission is to empower racial equity, racial equality by amplifying Asian American stories, and then our vision is to create a space to share Asian American stories to provide youth a platform to write their own future. Where I think Make Noise Today thrives is that it's evolved in the past 4 years where I think we're really focused on, we listen to youth, our AAPI youth, and provide them a platform. We don't tell them what they should know, how they should think. It's really, let us know what you need, and let us know what's on your mind, and we'll provide that platform. Being a communications agency, we have that through various platforms. And how do we do that? We have our social media, our Instagram page, Make Noise Today. And we also have an educational toolkit. And the educational toolkit is really based on storytelling and the various ways of storytelling that can really fight racial biases. And it's through an an Asian American lens. The great thing about this educational toolkit is that it's modular, and that's the way we created it. Is depending on, although the tenets stay the same, depending on the teacher and what they want to teach, it could be updated to fit a more African American audience, Hispanic, so on and so forth. And we also have our contest, student contest and exhibition. This is this is our third year, and we have a student contest this year. The theme was Amplifying Heritage, Empowering Futures. So Asian American students, we had 3 different categories: literature, performing arts, as well as visual arts. And we had this contest, and we actually take select student work and we turn it into an art exhibition that's actually launching this in a couple of weeks, June 13th, and you'll be able to see that at the Billie Jean King main library in downtown. And lastly, we also do workshops and group discussions. These are really helpful in terms of providing community and also teaching how to write teaching youth how to write stories. And in terms of cultural challenges, and our work with Make Noise Today has given us an up-close perspective of the mental health challenges for Asian Americans. And a couple of these, actually a lot of these, are similar to other youth and other segments. Stigma, and I think that's that's one thing that we've all spoken about here. And as we've seen, it is starting to, we're starting to get past that. Hopefully, within the next generation, it will be more common. And then also academic pressures. We'll talk a little more about that in the next slide. And then limited cultural competent care. It's really where you get those services. And I'll talk about that briefly as well later on. And then acculturation stresses. This is with other immigrant communities that we're always facing. But one of the areas that as we dove into for Make Noise Today and our conversations, as well as our roundtables, our student submissions, one area that we always saw that kind of popped up was the model minority myth. And for those who aren't familiar with the model minority myth, it's a term that got its beginnings in the civil rights movement. It was a way to categorize minority groups. And if there is a model minority, there has to be a non-model minority. And model to who? So obviously that term itself created a natural wedge between the various multicultural groups. And also, internally and in the family unit, it created undue pressures. There's the stereotype and intense pressure to achieve, leading to anxiety and depressions, particularly when they're not met. So through our conversations, we hear this, and there's a underlining theme of somewhat being a perpetual foreigner, and which is more prevalent with Asian American youth. But how can we help? And these are areas that Make Noise Today really pushes and promotes in terms of helping youth, taking control of the narrative. I think that's one thing that through our roundtables, or actually our workshops, it's teaching youth how to write their own stories and elements for their stories, empowering, amplifying, and sharing. Like I mentioned, we try to help youth direct and navigate. We don't tell. And then building community. A lot of times, especially this time, we'll do a lot of things that are virtual because there are API. We've been fortunate where we live in bigger cities, LA, San Francisco, so on and so forth, but there are the Asians in Duluth or South Carolina that don't have community. And I think one of our actual former clients from Disney had coined it very well, where knowing you're not alone has always been important, but now more than ever, because you have shared adversity, you know that you can link arms with other people and they're there for you. So these are the three areas that Make Noise Today really focuses in on, and really to support our AAPI youth. And I know that's a very abbreviated presentation, but I think I have 54 seconds, so thank you. And now I'll pass it over to Dr. Powell.
All right. I'm going to invite all the panelists to have a seat here, and as they're getting comfortable and ready to answer some of your questions, I do want to just re-emphasize, based on what was said again, how important caring is, listening, providing a platform for free expression, and providing a safe space so that every youth can thrive. And I know we don't have time to address everything that was mentioned, including suicidal ideation or anything like that. That's still very important to discuss, but I hope we can gather again like this and discuss those very important pieces another time. But for now, I have some questions, and again, after we conclude, they will be available to address any other questions that I don't get to. We don't have a lot of time, but I'll do my best. So first, let's start with Dr. Zavalza. And if you can please, going back to the mind-body connection, help someone understand how we can navigate burnout when it comes to adolescents taking care of themselves, especially youth who may be going through something medically, like a chronic situation, a condition like diabetes. How can we help prevent burnout or help the parents deal with this in their youth?
There we go. That's a really good question. Thank you for asking. And it's very real. A lot of our kiddos who have chronic illness are having to do a lot of intervention that many other children don't need to do. So they can either be in the hospital more often, missing out on daily life, celebrations, things of that sort. So burnout is part of having a chronic health condition. And so the first thing we can do is to just validate that. That's a very real experience. And we want to make sure that they're connected either to other youth that are going through similar things or in their communities. And last thing, especially with burnout, when they want to stop doing what they need to do for their health, I always try to find a point of motivation for them. What motivates them to take care of themselves? It might not be the same motivation that we have for them, but it might be attending something the next weekend, it might be getting to graduation, it might be whatever that is for them, trying to identify that, because really that's going to motivate themselves to take care of themselves, and we have less power to try to control taking care of that for them.
To add to that, maybe Karen and whoever wants to step up to this, but how do we further help parents stay engaged, and how do we help parents navigate to their own feelings to help their child?
I think that's a great question. I think that just for me, also working within a school district, you get a lot of parents who are they're frustrated, they're overwhelmed, they're stressed out. I always say that we all have this effect that happens to us when we leave a certain group. We start to forget what that group's challenges were, right? So parents what do they have to be stressed out about? What's bothering them? What's wrong? They don't pay bills. But I think oftentimes it's really important for myself and for all of us to really just try to spend some time connecting with that parent. Connection is huge. I think we'll probably just drill that in. Connection is huge. Listening, people need to vent and express themselves, and they need to feel validated. So there's nothing wrong with validating that a parent is stressed out and then using that information to help them see how maybe their child is also stressed out, that this child is also living in the same household and they're witnessing the same experiences or issues and having the same experiences. So that, for me, is the starting point. And then also just providing information in different languages, making sure that parents are even able to understand the information. Psychoeducation is huge, and so really trying to educate our parents so that they truly understand what their youth are experiencing.
Anyone else wants to add to that? Otherwise, I will move on to another question. Okay, so maybe we can talk about safe ways to refer or accept people into community centers, so that the LGBTQ center and programs like Make Noise Today. How do people start? So if you can talk a little bit about how we actually bridge what we're talking about to actually getting people to feel safe enough to join that community.
I guess I'll start. I find that, at least in our programs, specifically for our teen program, for example, we really make sure that the youth understand that we want to hold their privacy, comfort, and safety first, right? I think a lot of the time there is this concern, and it is a very real one for teens, where they're like, if I'm open with this person or with this group, is it going to get to my parents, right? Because especially for the population I work with LGBTQ plus youth, parents even knowing that they're even attending our program could actually lead to some very real safety concerns, right? So I think kind of ensuring that youth know from the get-go that they are safe to come to us, and that we will have them kind of lead conversations with their parents, and that we'll be sure to maintain their privacy. For a lot of our youth, they just don't have a place to, have a secure attachment or feel like they can talk openly with people in their households. And sometimes even their caregivers can be the source of distress rather than soothing for them. So when we can offer them a space where they can feel like that can happen, they're a lot more likely to reach out to us, right? And this is also why it's important to make sure that you are informed of resources that are relevant to your youth, so that way, if they have that rapport with you, they can come to you and be like, hey, I'm really struggling with, being a person of color who is also at school in, like, let's say a majority white school, right? Or I'm struggling with being the only lesbian student in my GSA, or whatever it is. Having those in your back pocket means that you are also telling them, I know of this resource and it's safe and this is how you sign up for it. So.
Great. For Asian American youth, we've seen, and Make Noise Today I think is more of the top layer where with youth and the way or Asian American youth, and when the way they find out is really through social media and online. They'll search first, and we also partner with other groups like Act to Change, one of them, and there are various groups specific to Asian Americans. Specific to Asian American youth, there are probably a little less, but we are able. I think when they go online, they're able to see first faces that look like them, or people that they can relate to, and then they'll reach out to us in terms of either more information or how to get involved. We've had a couple of virtual roundtables. I think the quick story there is that we'd love to have Make Noise Today affinity groups in various schools, but one of our youth ambassadors mentioned, yeah, that'd be great, but I'm one of 4 Asian American students in my high school in South Carolina. So how's that going to work? And so we really lean on the virtual aspect, because there are those Asian American youth that don't have the community in the different parts of the country. And I think even though our round tables are about 15 to 25 students, it's really a lot of the quality and the opportunity to speak, to be heard, that we are really proud of. And I think I mentioned to one of our colleagues that it's always, or Dr. Powell, we don't look for affirmation, but it's always nice to hear from the youth themselves saying, thank you for having this roundtable, because otherwise I wouldn't have any community.
Thank you for that. And I'm going to keep the attention really quickly on both of you again. So Peter and Michael, there was a question regarding technology. Since you both kind of brought up different forums in terms of having a process until they get into a program or express themselves, how can we leverage technology to create accessible, and I'm adding safe and reliable, culturally competent mental health resources for people? So not only having your platforms or forums, but how do we make sure it's the right channel, it's the right Instagram account, it's the right way of getting to you, where people are getting safe information in order to really express themselves safely. So in terms of technology, what do you say is safe, or how do you get people to kind of use those platforms?
Oh, hello. Okay. For us, we actually, getting to like the technology part, we typically use QR codes because teens and really youth of all ages do not like filling out forms. I think maybe we've all probably dealt with that in here. So making it as simple as accessible as possible, while also, we put on our form like this information is not going to get out to anybody except us, right? And the only thing we will use is the email in order to send you directly, our information. We also ask to, is it safe for us to even contact your emergency contact, right? Because that's usually part of it. And if it is safe, are we allowed to use your name? Like, can we use your pronouns? Can we tell them who we are? And then also, I think when it comes to making sure that it's like the right entity, I think it's similar to many of us where it's like social media is very important. And also making sure that our contact to our direct staff is very much present. We do a lot of outreach, like at this event, for example. And we also do a lot of outreach at schools and whatnot, just so that people meet the actual facilitators and the service providers who are going to be helping them. So,
That's great. Michael?
I think just dovetailing on what Peter mentioned is the outreach. With students, it's also aligning ourselves with legitimate and good people, be it organizations or influencers and whatnot. I think that's definitely an area that, be it if they want to be involved with Make Noise Today, participate, or another organization that fits them, maybe possibly better, it's great. It's really depending on, we just want to make sure that they do are heard, and then also are that they're linked up with the right folks. For us specifically, in terms of any comments or trolling, we do keep an eye on that, so we curb that pretty quickly.
That's great. Speaking of resources, I'm going to go to Katrina and Karen now. If you can speak a little bit about resources that are available for youth who might be, like in Evie's case or JJ, already behind academically or getting in trouble before the point of juvenile hall. Like, what are the resources, or what can we say or provide to those individuals, whether in the community or at school, to help them get back to something better?
There are a variety of resources available. The challenge is making sure that parents and the youth are aware of those resources. School's definitely a great place to tap into, but if there isn't a safe space created where you can go and ask, or maybe somebody, like nobody's seeing you, like you were talking about with Evie, if that isn't created, it makes it a little more challenging. Some of the other resources that we've gotten folks connected to have been, YMCA, Boys and Girls Clubs. There's also a lot, especially in summertime, there's a lot that happens through the Park and Recs departments within the cities. And that's an untapped resource that is used. And then many of our programs are also partnered with various different organizations that will receive funding for like a short amount of time, for a summer period, or for, fall, spring semester, where there's different programs that folks can access, that youth, children, and then also young adults can access at some point.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I agree with all of that. I think that the parents can start with schools and just local agencies to see what's available, especially in the summertime. Like we discussed over and over again, connection is huge, just making sure that the individual is connected. It depends on how severe the situation is. There are other programs within the state where students could even live somewhere, and it's not like mental health related, but sometimes it does do more, the programs focus more like the adventure therapy, that grounding, that structure. But every child is different. Programs like that do not work for everyone, so it's really individualized. I also say when we're talking about how do we try to prevent our students from entering the criminal justice system, I think that, again, we have to, as a community, look at ourselves, and we have to realize that this is a systemic problem. There's a disproportionate emphasis on who is incarcerated. Our Black and brown youth are highly incarcerated, and so we have to start with our school systems, that whole school to prison pipeline, like all of that's real, and so we need to do a check-in and check our biases and how we're labeling our students as well.
Thank you. We have a lot more questions, not so much time, in terms of resources for employment for our youth, in terms of what works best in terms of therapies. And hopefully, for those of you who have raised those questions, if you're here, you can address those individually with some of the panel members. I do want to ask one more question in terms of everyone, so I'm addressing it to everyone. What can we do better? What do you think, starting today, we can do better? Like you said, checking our biases is one, connecting, kind of promoting these kind of events. What else can we do as a community to make it better for the youth to feel safe and continue to come to us?
Okay, I'll say on the individual and family level, again, making it a routine part of checking in about mental health. I don't think that we do that often. There's still a lot of stigma. So as an individual and family, and when you interact with any professional that's involved in your child's life, mention that to them. I'm concerned, or I just want them to be checked on. Who should I go to? Who can assess that? Whether it's their doctor or their teacher or the counselor or someone in the community, their coach. So starting to kind of take initiative in that. And then on the systems end, right, which is a lot of us, is starting to create opportunity for those patients and families, or youth and families to create space to ask around those things and make it a normal part of our conversations, right? As doctors or healthcare workers or teachers, to start to say, hey, and how have you been feeling actually? Or how are things going? Where is your stress level recently, right? And starting to make that a normal part of our discussions with our youth so that they have opportunities to actually tell us and that we can take initiative there to link them to the resources that they need. And also talking with our colleagues, right? How can I help you in checking in with those people? Because I think others aren't as educated either, or might not feel comfortable asking around some of those things, so we can be the leaders in our community in that way.
I would just also add with that, yes, we have to model it, right? It has to start with us. So we have to check in with ourselves. Our children are watching us. I have a 5-year-old, she's watching me, so I have to use language like, mommy's a little overwhelmed right now. Like, it's okay, right? We're modeling that behavior. And she uses that language at 5 years old. I'm frustrated, mommy. I'm overwhelmed, mommy. I want to do some breathing, mommy. I'm modeling that for her, right? Every generation can make a change. I didn't have that. I'm first generation, and I remember talking to my mom about therapy. That's a whole different conversation, don't have the time. But just talking to her about self-care and how does she care for herself. And she's just like, what are you talking about? Like, if I did things for myself, people would probably look at me like weird. And so now, in her 70s, she's caring for herself. And I love that for her, but I'm just like, wow, what if she did that when she was raising me? What difference would it have made in my life, in her life? So we could start with ourselves, and we could model that behavior as well.
I love that. I was thinking of like, what would it be? And it's absolutely that, role modeling. I mean, it's profound, the impact that we can have on the person next to us just by the energy and the attitude that we are putting out. My little 8-year-old godson, love him to death. He is my person. For those of you that watch Grey's Anatomy, he is my person. And he actually comes here quite a bit for testing. And I taught him how to do grounding work and deep breathing when he has to get blood taken out because his anxiety goes up. And he watches him do that. And it's amazing how kids absorb that and creating that space and then normalizing it. So when him and I are doing Legos and I get a little frustrated with the Lego, he says, Nina, don't forget to breathe, do deep breaths. And then he uses that when he goes to the doctors. If I'm not able to go and my sister is taking him, he uses that, and he is now teaching her how to do it. And this is an 8-year-old little boy that practices that. So absolutely, it starts with us. I think the other thing, and this is something that we had the opportunity to do through MHLA in one of our grants, we received an innovations grant that allowed us to do a lot of community work, because you can do some great individualized work, but unless the environment is shifting, that individual work sometimes is really, really difficult. And so we did a lot of community level work, doing education and talking to the community about trauma and the impact that it has on particular populations. The TAE individuals, LGBTQI, that are at risk of being homeless. And so, you know, there's so many different programs that are out there. NAMI is a great one in terms of getting connected. And so, yeah, shout out to NAMI. You know, and then connecting with programs like some of ours. We provide some community level outreach education workshops. There's CPR. We have, you know, one for mental health, and it's called Mental Health First Aid. And so the more that you educate and role model those things, the bigger impact that you're going to have on the people around you. And you have no idea what that impact is, but you'll see it, and it's pretty amazing.
After you.
I guess something I think especially listening to everyone here today, and also just kind of the work that we do, I think it's important to remember that all of us in this room and everyone in general has an intersectional identity, right? We all have different layers to ourselves, whether that is race, gender, cultural background, socioeconomic class, orientation, et cetera, et cetera. And sometimes I think when we meet like a youth and maybe we find out something about them, like let's say they are talking about struggling with fitting in, right, based on their cultural background, we have to remember that we are so complex as people, and that as soon as you meet a youth who maybe says like, I want to come out, they are not the gay kid now. Like they have a lot of different layers to them, maybe they are also like Korean, right? Maybe they are female. Maybe there's all these different layers that I think we have to factor in as a whole, because mental health is so much about the self as it is about our surroundings. And then also, I guess this isn't so much a thing of like, we could do this better, but just kind of an acknowledgement that sometimes all a youth really needs is someone consistent in their life, right? And even just sitting and being able to listen is not something all of our youth have. And just recognizing that that is a huge impact in and of itself, just having someone they can trust and be open with, just one person can really be huge in improving their mental health outcomes. So.
Okay, I guess I'll finish it up. I think there are a couple of things. Number one is really and not just from an Asian American perspective, but overall, is that your story isn't the same as their story. And be cognizant that as much as you'd like to say, suck it up. When I was your age, you can't. I have had so many instances where I'd like to do the same with my daughter, but you need to catch yourself. And I think everyone here in this room wants to raise better adults than we have currently. So I think hopefully that with the tools that we've all learned, or at least have been made aware of, we'll be able to do that.
Thank you very much, and we'll conclude with that, but I did want to say thank you to everybody who showed up, including the representatives in the room, because it takes a village, right, to do everything and to do it better, and collaboration like this is absolutely necessary for us to succeed, not in our own professions or roles, but to be able to raise those competent adults, right? So thank you so much for being here. And again, if you have any additional questions, I'm sorry I didn't get to all of them. We can spend all day here on the questions that were raised. But I appreciate everyone's time. Thank you so much. And I encourage you to use the QR code that's on the tables or here to answer some questions. It will help us better plan for next year and hopefully continue to raise awareness and minimize stigma when it comes to mental health. Thank you so much.